I had a plan for my life, a real one. Not the kind parents hand you like a gift you never asked for. I was going to study architecture. I'd known it since I was 9 years old, sitting on the floor of my grandmother's living room in Asheville, tracing the lines of her old house blueprints she kept in a cardboard box under the stairs. She'd let me spread them out on the carpet, and I'd spend hours just looking at how walls became rooms became homes. My grandmother, I called her Gram, she'd bring me hot chocolate and sit beside me without saying anything, just watching. She understood something about me before I understood it myself. My parents had a different plan. My father is a civil engineer. My mother spent 20 years as a hospital administrator. In our house, success had a very specific shape. It had credentials behind it. It had a title people recognized at dinner parties. When I was 16 and told my mother I wanted to apply to the College of Design at NC State, she set her coffee cup down so carefully it made no sound at all. And then she looked at me the way you look at someone who just said something embarrassing in public. Architecture, she said, not a question. More like she was testing the word to see if it was as ridiculous out loud as it was in her head. Yes, I said, I've been researching the program. It's one of the best in the Vivienne. That was all. Just my name, and the conversation was over. I should tell you something about my family. We are not a dramatic family. We don't yell. We don't slam doors. What we do is worse. We go quiet. We make each other feel like something is wrong with us for wanting things they don't approve of. And we do it without raising our voices once. My mother could make me feel like a complete stranger in my own home with nothing but a look and a 3-second silence. For 2 years, I tried to make them see it. I brought home books on architectural history. I showed my father the salary data, the job growth projections, the firms I wanted to eventually work for. He would look at everything I put in front of him and nod and then say something like, "But what's the actual plan, Vivienne? What happens if it doesn't work out?" As if every other career path came with a guarantee. My mother's approach was different. She started leaving printouts on my desk. Business programs, healthcare administration, one time, a pamphlet for a pre-law track at a school 3 hours away that she'd apparently called and requested information from without telling me. I threw that one away before she could see that I'd seen it. The summer before my senior year, Graham got sick. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but serious enough that she spent a lot of time at home with less energy than she used to have. I drove out to Asheville every other weekend, and we'd sit in her kitchen, and she'd ask me about my plans, and I'd tell her everything, the programs I was applying to, the professors I'd researched, the studio courses I was most excited for. She listened to all of it. Really listened, not waiting for me to finish so she could redirect me. In September, she handed me an envelope. Inside was a check for $4,000 and a note that said, "For the girl who knows what she wants. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't enough." Graham, I cried in the car the whole way home. I submitted my applications in November without telling my parents. NC State was my first choice. I'd also applied to Georgia Tech, Virginia Tech, and Carnegie Mellon as a reach. I didn't tell anyone except my best friend from high school, Roxanne, who kept the secret with me for 3 months and never once let it slip. The acceptance email from NC State came on a Tuesday afternoon in February. I was in my room doing homework. I read it 4 times. Then I sat very still for about 10 minutes. Then I called Roxanne and cried again, the good kind this time. I made the mistake of telling my parents at dinner. I don't know what I expected. Maybe somewhere in the back of my mind I thought the acceptance itself would change something. That if I got in, really got in, to a real program with a real scholarship offer, they would see that this wasn't some fantasy. That this was me actually doing the thing. My mother asked how I'd submitted the applications without their financial information. I explained about Graham's money, about using my own savings from working at the coffee shop. I'd covered all the application fees myself. I was proud of that. My father asked why I kept it secret. I said I'd been afraid they wouldn't support it. And then my mother said, very quietly, "You were right to be afraid." That was the moment I understood we were not going to resolve this over dinner. What happened over the next 6 weeks, I still find difficult to describe accurately. There was no single explosion. It was more like a slow withdrawal of everything that had made that house feel livable. My mother stopped asking about my day. My father started responding to my questions with the minimum possible words. The dinner table became a place where the three of us sat and ate in near total silence, and I would watch the clock on the microwave behind my mother's head and count the minutes until I could leave the room. I turned 18 in March. My parents did not make a big deal of it. There was a card on the counter and a cake my mother bought from the grocery store. We ate it watching the news. In April, my father sat me down and told me they would not be contributing to my education if I went to NC State. No help with tuition beyond what the scholarship covered. No help with housing. No health insurance once I turned 19 and they could legally remove me from their plan. He said it plainly, like he was reading from a document he prepared. My mother sat beside him and did not look at me. I said I understood. I said I was going anyway. My mother finally looked up. Then maybe you should find somewhere else to stay for the summer. I thought she meant I should stay with a friend. Or with Graham. Some kind of temporary cooling-off arrangement. I didn't understand she meant it the way she meant it until the following Sunday, when I came downstairs and found 2 suitcases in the hallway with a note on top listing my belongings that were in them. I stood in the hallway for a long time. I picked up my phone and called my father's cell. He answered. I said, "Is this really what you're doing?" He said, "You've made your position clear. We've made ours." The front door was behind me. The suitcases were at my feet. I picked them up and I left. I had $2,200 in my bank account, Graham's check, minus the application fees, minus a few months of saving whatever I made at the coffee shop. I was 18 years old and it was a Sunday in April and I stood on the front porch with 2 suitcases and I did not cry. I was too surprised to cry. Or maybe too angry. I'm not sure there's much difference at that age. Roxanne's mother, a woman named, I'll call her Mrs. A because she hates being in stories, let me sleep on their couch for 2 weeks without asking questions. She fed me. She pretended everything was normal. I will never forget that. I found a sublet in Raleigh through a college housing board. A woman named Bridget who was going home to Charlotte for the summer and needed someone to cover her room for 3 months. $500 a month, utilities included. I took it immediately. I worked 40 hours a week at a coffee shop near campus all summer. I learned to cook rice and beans about 15 different ways. I found a free community therapy center that worked on a sliding scale and I went every other Thursday and I talked about my parents and my anger and my fear, and slowly I started to feel less like the floor was moving under me. When September came, I moved into the residence hall at NC State and I started school. And I did not look back. I will not make the next 8 years sound easy, because they weren't. There were semesters where I worked 25 hours a week alongside a full course load and barely slept. There was a year where I ate mostly ramen and peanut butter sandwiches and told myself it was temporary, which it was. But that doesn't mean it wasn't hard. There were nights I let myself feel the full weight of what my parents had done. Not often, but sometimes when I was exhausted and homesick for some version of family that had probably never quite existed. I graduated in 5 years instead of 4 because I added a structural focus to my degree and it was worth it. Graham came to my graduation. She took the train from Asheville by herself and wore a lavender dress and cried through the whole ceremony. And after, she held both my hands and said, "There she is." I got a position at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. Worked my way into project management. At 27, I led the design team on a mixed-use development in Uptown Charlotte that won a regional award. By 29, I was a licensed architect and had been promoted to associate. I had built something. Not an empire, not a fairy tale, just a real, solid, actual life that was entirely mine. I was happy. I want to be clear about that. I was genuinely, specifically happy. Not in spite of what my parents had done, but sort of around it, the way a tree grows around a scar in its bark. The scar doesn't disappear. You just grow larger than it. I had not spoken to my parents in 7 years. My mother called on a Thursday evening in October. I was driving home from a site visit, still in my work clothes, radio on low. When her name appeared on my car's display screen, I was so startled I almost missed my exit. I had not deleted her number. I'm not sure why. Maybe because deleting it felt like a decision, and I decided a long time ago that I was just going to let the silence be what it was, without making a ceremony out of it. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. Then she called again 2 days later. Then my father called. Then, on the following Monday, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize that turned out to be my younger brother Eli, who had been 12 years old the last time I saw him and was now, apparently, 19, and in possession of the cell phone and my number. The text said, "Viv, please. Mom and Dad need to talk to you. It's serious." I sat with that for a long time. Then I texted back, "What kind of serious?" He said, "Dad lost his job 8 months ago. They're behind on the mortgage. They didn't want me to tell you, but I thought you should know. I want to be honest about what I felt, because I think people expect a certain kind of reaction to this news, and I'm not sure mine was that." I did not feel triumphant. I want to say that clearly, because the easiest and also the least true story here is the one where I felt like justice had been served. I didn't. What I felt was something more complicated. A kind of tired sadness, the way you feel when you've been right about something you never wanted to be right about. I also felt protective of Eli. He was 19. He'd grown up in whatever my parents' house had become after I left. He'd texted me quietly, going around them because he was worried. That mattered to me. I called Roxanne that night, like I always do when I don't know what to do. She listened to everything and then she said, "What do you actually want, Viviv?" "Not what you're supposed to want. What do you want?" I thought about it for a long time. I said, "I want to look them in the face." I agreed to meet them once. One meeting. I chose the location, a coffee shop in Charlotte, which meant they would have to drive to me. And I chose the time, a Saturday at 11 in the morning, which gave me the rest of the day afterward and didn't require me to see them in any space that felt like theirs. Roxanne offered to come. I said no, I needed to do it alone. I got there early, ordered a coffee, found a table where I could see the door. They came in together. My mother looked older than I'd been prepared for, which sounds like an obvious thing to say. But I had last seen her when I was 18 and she was 42, and in my head, she had stayed 42. The woman who walked through the door was 52. She walked more carefully. My father had gained weight, and his hair was almost fully gray. They saw me and my mother's face did something complicated. I couldn't tell if she was about to cry or about to revert immediately into the version of herself that went quiet and cold when things got hard. They sat down. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then my father said, "Vivienne, thank you for meeting us." I nodded. He explained the situation carefully. He'd been laid off when his company downsized. He'd been looking for 8 months without success. They were 4 payments behind on the mortgage. My mother's salary alone wasn't enough to cover it. He was thorough and factual about it, the way engineers are, and I sat across the table and listened to every word. When he finished, my mother said, "We didn't know who else to call." I looked at her. "I need you to understand something," I said. "I'm willing to hear you out, but I need you to also hear something first." Neither of them spoke. When you put those suitcases in the hallway, I had 18 years behind me and $2,000 in my bank account and nowhere to go. I figured it out. But not because of anything you did. I figured it out in spite of you. And I spent 7 years building a life that has nothing to do with either of you, and that life is good, and I'm not willing to compromise it. My mother's eyes were wet. "We know we made mistakes." "I need it to be more specific than that," I said. "I don't need an apology that covers everything in general. I need you to say what you actually did." There was a very long silence. My father said, "We asked you to leave. When you were 18, we gave you no real support, and we told ourselves it was a consequence, and it wasn't. We were wrong." My mother said, "I was so afraid you were making a mistake that I made a much bigger one. I had decided before I walked into that coffee shop what I was willing to do and what I wasn't. I was not going to give them money directly, not because I couldn't, but because I didn't think it would help the actual problem. and also because I had spent a long time learning the difference between helping someone and letting them reach into the life you built and take from it. What I did was this. I connected my father with a contact of mine, a civil engineering firm in Charlotte that had been quietly expanding, and wrote a referral email that I spent a week getting exactly right. I'm not going to pretend this was purely altruistic. I wanted to be able to live with myself. I wanted to be able to tell Eli honestly that I had done something. For the mortgage, I did not pay it. What I did was connect them with a HUD-approved housing counselor I'd worked with on a community development project. A woman who specialized in exactly this kind of situation and who had real options for people facing foreclosure that most people don't know exist. I paid for 3 sessions, that was all. I set one condition and I set it at the table before we left. If this works, I said, and things stabilize, I'm willing to be in contact. I'm willing to have a relationship. But it's going to be the relationship I agree to, not the one you design for me. And if either of you ever makes me feel, again, like my choices are an embarrassment to you, I will end the conversation and I will not explain myself. My mother nodded. My father said, "That's fair." I didn't hug them when we left. I wasn't ready for that. I shook my father's hand, which felt formal and strange, and I looked at my mother for a moment and said, "I'll be in touch." Then I walked to my car and I sat in it for about 15 minutes before I drove home. It has been 8 months since that meeting. My father got the job. He started in January. He emailed me to tell me 2 lines, very brief, and I wrote back 2 lines. It's like that. Small, careful, tentative. I don't know yet what it's going to become. I'm not sure I need to know. Eli came to visit me in Charlotte in March. He's studying communications at a school in Tennessee, and he's bright and funny, and he has opinions about everything. We went out for barbecue and walked around the city, and he asked me what it was like to leave, and I told him, honestly, the whole thing. He listened the way people listen when they're really trying to understand something. When I finished, he said, "I always thought they were wrong." He said it quietly, like he'd been holding it for a long time. I put my arm around his shoulders and we walked for a while without talking. My mother called me on my birthday. She sang the first line of Happy Birthday and then stopped, like she suddenly wasn't sure she was allowed to be doing it, and said, "I just wanted to say it." I said thank you. The call lasted 4 minutes. It was awkward and strange, and I cried a little after I hung up. And I don't think that's weakness. I think it's just what it is when something broken starts figuring out if it can hold weight again. You test it slowly. You don't know yet if it will hold. I'm still figuring out what I want from this, and I've made my peace with the fact that I might not know for a while. What I do know is this. I left at 18 with 2 suitcases and I built something they tried to tell me I couldn't. I did it without them. And if anything comes next, if there's any version of a relationship that grows from what happened in that coffee shop, it's going to be on terms that I set. Not because I'm holding something over them, but because I learned the hard way that you can love people and still refuse to let them shrink you. That's not revenge. That's just knowing who you are. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that Saturday in Charlotte. Not in any mystical sense, just the plain observable kind. The kind where you trace a line from one decision to another, and you see, clearly, how everything that came after was already inside everything that came before. My parents made a choice when I was 18. They decided that control mattered more than connection, that their vision of my future was worth more than my actual future. And they made that choice quietly, without drama, which somehow made it harder to argue against and easier to carry as a wound. They put 2 suitcases in a hallway and called it consequence. What they didn't understand, what I don't think they've fully understood even now, is that every action like that leaves a shape in the world. It doesn't disappear, it just waits. What I built in the years after, I built on my own, not because I'm exceptional, because I had no other option, and necessity teaches you things comfort never will. I learned to figure out problems before I panicked about them. I learned to ask for help from the right people. Mrs. A, who gave me her couch without making me feel like a charity case. Bridget, who sublet gave me a place to land. Graham, who saw something in me worth backing when the people who were supposed to believe in me had decided not to. These people were not accidents. They showed up because I let them. Because I was willing to be honest about what I needed instead of pretending I was fine. That's the thing about integrity. And I don't mean it as a virtue signaling word. I mean it in the oldest sense. The structural one. Like a building that holds its shape under pressure. You build it slowly, out of small decisions. You decide to be honest when lying would be easier. You decide to keep going when stopping would feel like relief. You decide to let people help you without letting that help become the whole story. Vivienne didn't win because the universe rewarded her. She won because she did the work consistently over years when nobody was watching and nobody was clapping. And Eli. I think about Eli a lot. He grew up in that house after I left, watching what my absence looked like from the inside, forming his own conclusions about it quietly over years. The fact that he texted me, that he went around my parents because he thought I deserved to know the truth, tells me something hopeful about what integrity looks like when it grows in difficult conditions. He didn't have anyone showing him the way. He just figured out on his own what the right thing was. The hardest part of all of this isn't the years I spent building something from nothing. The hardest part is holding open a door for people who once shut one in your face, and doing it not because you owe them anything, but because you've decided that's the kind of person you want to be. That's where character actually lives. Not in the easy moments, not in the wins, but in what you choose when you have every reason to choose otherwise. I left with 2 suitcases. I came back with a life, and I decided, standing in that coffee shop parking lot, that the life I'd built was big enough to be generous from, carefully on my terms, without giving away what I'd worked to protect. That's not a fairy tale ending, it's just an honest one.